Hello, and welcome to our training on systematic reviews and evidence synthesis beyond the health sciences. This is a training institute for librarians developed by the evidence synthesis teams at the Cornell University Libraries, University of Minnesota Libraries, and Carnegie Mellon University Libraries. We all at these institutions developed within the last few years system review services or services to help researchers with systematic reviews and evidence synthesis, specifically outside the health sciences. So that's been a lot of agriculture, psychology, education, social sciences, as well as some of the physical sciences and humanities. So we have a lot of expertise on this, and determined that, when we were figuring this out, there weren't a lot of training materials available outside the health sciences and really wanted to fill that gap. So that's where this training is coming from. And for the beginning of this, I want to give some introductions to the people you'll be hearing throughout this training. So we have Kate Gezi-Kopel from Cornell University. Myself, I'm Megan Coker at the University of Minnesota Libraries. Chris Fournier at Cornell University, Amy Regelman from the University of Minnesota, Aaron Eldermeyer at Cornell, Jim Morris-Noer at Cornell, Megan Lafferty at University of Minnesota, Sarah Young from Carnegie Mellon University, and Kelly Johnson, also from Cornell University. So, the goals of this workshop today, or whatever day you're taking it, are to provide an overview of the evidence synthesis process and challenges outside the health sciences, to grow your familiarity with techniques and tools used in systematic reviews and evidence synthesis, and to give you some practice formulating questions and developing search strategies. So I want to talk a little bit about why evidence synthesis is important, why we do this work, and why it's important for librarians to be involved, and what sort of the current landscape looks like for this outside the health sciences. First, I want to talk about the terms we're using. So evidence synthesis is sort of the broader term that we use, and it refers to just the process of bringing together information from a range of sources and disciplines to inform debates and decisions on specific issues. Evidence synthesis includes a range of types of reviews. So a systematic review is one type of evidence synthesis. There are many others, meta-analysis, scoping review, that we'll talk about later in these modules. Often systematic review gets used interchangeably, or is the term people are most familiar with. So when we set up our service, we called it a systematic review service. But in fact, we do any type of evidence synthesis. So to give a little bit on what specifically a systematic review is, this is a review that uses systematic, explicit methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant research, to collect and analyze data from the studies that are included in the review. So this may or may not include the meta-analysis, depending on what the research looks like. So if there's not quantitative information available, there won't be a meta-analysis included. So that's a different part of it. Other types of reviews, that get used often in fields outside the health sciences is a scoping review, which is very similar to systematic review, but doesn't have that critical appraisal portion of it, where you're actually looking at the included studies and doing some quality assessment of what is included. And, systematic reviews are great in identifying gaps in research and providing evidence for practice and policy making. And the importance of them is that they're conducted in an unbiased and reproducible way. That's why this sort of takes that to the next level, so that you're not just selecting studies that support what you're saying. You're laying out all the methods that you went to find what was included in the study and how you did that, and showing your work on that. And to give an illustration of how this got to be so important in the health sciences, I like to talk about the Cochrane Collaborative logo. So this is the logo for the Cochrane Collaborative, and they are the big systematic review group in the health sciences. And what this logo is actually is a diagram from a systematic review published in 1990. And this systematic review looked at, and meta-analysis looked at a corticosteroid given to women who are about to give birth prematurely. And largely the research had been done on this, in the 80s and earlier, but no one had looked at it systematically until the 1990s. And when they did that, they discovered, that this intervention reduced the odds of complications from premature birth, both to the baby or the mother, by 30 to 50%. So had this type of review been done earlier, physicians would have had that evidence and been able to have more confidence and might have had a standard of using that intervention and actually saved or improved lives with that. That's not often the case with agriculture or other disciplines outside the health sciences, but they can still have a pretty big impact. Reasons to conduct a systematic review versus a narrative literature review that has been more common is to increase the transparency and reproducibility of what you're doing. So in looking at this, this is a literature review with a methods section, and you're going to be able to say how exactly you found what you did and be transparent about how you included what was in there so that people know that you looked at everything and had guidelines for what was included. Every step in the process is there to reduce bias with careful study design. We talked about identifying gaps in existing research. It can influence decision making. And you'll see that in this diagram, I'm just showing how use of systematic reviews is really growing in disciplines outside the health sciences. What I did here was graph numbers of hits for just the search systematic review in titles in various subject-specific databases. So this top line here is the database PsycInfo, which covers, psychology topics broadly, and you'll see that that number, has been growing pretty steadily over the past years. Every line on here is going up and up. So CAB abstracts, which is agriculture, is next, and that's, nearly doubled in the 5-year span that I included in here. So librarians in all disciplines are suddenly finding themselves asked to participate or help with or even guide this type of research. And so this is why we think this training is important. And, this is, for myself, this is how our service got started, is that, 6 years ago, I started getting requests from my nutrition department, and then as I started talking to other librarians, they were like, oh, we're getting them too. I talked to Amy in psychology, she was getting them, and that has just grown over the years. We've seen that, and I don't anticipate it stopping. I anticipate it growing more, and because guidelines for both, from organizations that give guidelines on systematic review procedures and things really recommend that a librarian be involved because you need a comprehensive search strategy. This is something that there's going to be a lot of need for training on. Outside the health sciences, there are a lot of questions that systematic reviews or evidence synthesis can answer. So before this training, I had asked folks to find a systematic review or evidence synthesis project in their discipline. And here are some of the answers of what people came up with, what questions were being answered. So there's things like the impact of feeding raw meat to dogs, interventions in K-12 to create STEM outcomes, factors associated with student achievement in historically Black colleges and university. You can see the range here. You can apply these methods to a broad range of topics. from business, social work. There are library science systematic reviews, and I'd love to see more of those and see them done well, to put in a plug for that. So you can take a look at this and get some ideas about what are the types of questions these reviews can answer.